I, for one, are certainly looking forward to hearing more about Steve's journey through life. So please, can you welcome Steve Bell to the stage?
Which one of you will be the first to die? I wasn't expecting that. I didn't expect the single hand to go up. Because none of us know when we're going to die. None of us know how long we've got. Who here is 18 years old? 18-year-olds? Let's see you. There's some very young-looking 18-year-olds' hands going up. Well, I died when I was 18 years old. Or at least I knew that I was going to die. I knew without any shadow of a doubt that in a few seconds I would be lying dead on a glacier 2,000 feet below. I was holding on to this ice axe. I'd like to pass it around. There's a lot of you to get round. You're only going to have a couple of seconds each. So are you game for it? Okay, I call it my lucky axe. My lucky axe, and I want you all to hold the lucky axe at least for a second. So keep it going. That's it. So you might be asking yourself, how does an 18-year-old find himself dead on the side of a mountain? It happened like this. If I can get this to work. There we are. So I was a gawky kid. This is me when I was about 9 years old. I know a lot of you, some of you here may be 9 years old. And I was small for my age. I had a lazy eye. I had to wear glasses. I was useless at sport. I was always the last one to be picked. Does anyone know what that feels like? You've got the team captains. They're both picking their people. And of course, the good players get picked first. And then there's the last person that nobody wants in their team. Well, I was that person. And I hated it. I hated feeling like the last person. And because I was so bad at sport, and because I was bad for small for my age, and because I wore glasses, I was an easy target for bullies. But I refused to accept that that's what I was going to be. I refused to accept that I was going to be a victim. Because I knew, deep down, that there was a path for my life. I just didn't know quite yet what it was going to be. So I had this sense that there was a purpose out there for me. There was a purpose to my life. But I didn't know what it was. It sort of sat there as the shape of something on the horizon. I could see the shape of something, but I didn't know what it was. Now, purpose is a very powerful thing. Purpose is what gets us out of bed in the morning. We leap out of bed and seize the new day. Purpose gives our lives meaning. Purpose can shape everything that we do. But how do you find your purpose? Where do you get it from? Well, a good place to look is whatever interests you, whatever moves you, whatever just makes you sit up and think about things. And somewhere in there will be something that in that thing that interests you, there'll be a reason for you to pursue it. And I found that my purpose was in the outdoors. And I did lots of different things outdoors. I tried, because I was so bad at sport, I tried canoeing, I tried hiking, I went camping, and I did lots of outdoorsy things. But it wasn't until I went rock climbing that I truly found my purpose. And the moment I first left the ground, if I can get this, seems to be a little bit slow to change. Sorry about that. Thank you. The moment I left the ground when I was 15 years old, I knew that I'd found my passion and my purpose for life. I loved the feeling of pulling up on the holes, the physical strenuosity of it, the sense of achievement when you got to the top, and the challenge of working out the moves. It made me feel like I was worthy. And for the first time in my life, I thought perhaps there is something that I can really be good at, because I was used to being bad at things. So my purpose was doing something that I could feel good at, that I felt that I could progress at it. So I just did that all the time. Every weekend, I would go from school, and I'd go with a friend to a nearby rock face. This is in England. And I would climb harder and harder, and I was driven by my purpose to climb harder climbs. Now, those of you, have you been rock climbing? Have you been to an indoor climbing gym? Lots of you. That's fantastic. So do you know that those climbs, they're all graded? Okay, so you might have done a grade 7, you might have done a grade 8 or a 9. Has anyone done any climb harder than that? Does anyone know the grades of climbs? The hardest grade that you can climb at the moment is about grade 37. Okay, so they're getting, there's this whole ladder of grades that you can advance up. And that's what I was engaged in. I love the idea that you could go one rung at a time. And each time I would go out, I would try and do a route that I'd not done before, or that was a harder grade than I'd ever done before. And I got better at it. And as I got better, I found that I was changing. I found that I was growing from a scrawny kid into a strong young man. And that made me feel good about myself. It made me feel worthy. And that was all because I had found a passion and I'd found a purpose for my life. I teamed up with a couple of friends at school, and they were keen on climbing as well. And we used to hang around during the school recess, and we would stand around a chair like this, and we'd all have our leg up on it, and we'd be talking about climbing, and we'd be sitting like this, and we'd be imitating the moves of the route that we'd done the weekend before, and we'd be talking about where we were going to go the following weekend. And while we were standing there, all three of us with our legs on the chair, people would be making fun of us, the other school students. They think it was so funny. Here's these three posers, just sort of gesticulating around a chair. And of course, if you're different, anybody that's different is made fun of. But I didn't mind being made fun of, because while I was doing climbs like this at the weekend, they were at home watching TV. So why should I feel that I was any less than them just because they were making fun of me? So having climbed rock, what I really wanted to do was climb mountains. If a 40-meter rock face gave me a huge buzz to climb it, how would a 4,000-meter mountain feel? And I just had this idea that mountaineering was my path, that was my destiny. So I cajoled my parents into buying me climbing equipment for mountaineering, because of course mountains aren't just made of rock. They're covered in snow and ice. So you have to climb snow and ice, and you need special equipment to do that. You need crampons for your feet. You need an ice axe in each hand. Where's that ice axe now? Is it going round? Okay, keep it moving, guys. There's a lot of people to get round. So one of those ice axes that I got was the one that's going around now. The other ice axe was a straight-picked ice axe, and it's not as good. But that ice axe in the 1970s was the best ice axe money could buy. And I was really excited to get it. So as soon as I got my climbing equipment, I hitchhiked to Scotland with another school friend. And I found a boss of ice, and we put that climbing gear on, and we tried to climb ice. And of course, we made a hash of it. We didn't really know what we were doing. We'd just seen photographs, but we thought, well, we couldn't afford to go on a climbing course. No one taught us how to do it. So we just thought, well, let's just go and do it. Let's just go and give it a go. You can see there in my right hand is the ice axe that is being passed around now. It's in my right hand because it's got a hammerhead on it. And you need a hammerhead to hit the ice pitons into the ice that are going to hold you to the side of the mountain. And in the other hand, with the straight pick, it's got like an adze, like a mattock for cutting steps. So you've got these two tools, and that's what you climb with. So my friend Chris was a year older than me. Now, he couldn't afford to get axes like I did. I mean, I was lucky. My parents were able to afford it. But he came from a very poor family, and he had to beg, borrow, and steal his equipment. So there he is. He's got two hammerheads, and they're not drop-picked like the one that I'm passing around. So it's a lot less secure. But we thought, look, we're just going to go climbing anyway. We had this passion. We had this purpose of climbing mountains, and we weren't going to let a little bit of not such good equipment hold us back. We still wanted to do it. So the day after leaving school, we hitchhiked to the French Alps. Again, we didn't have any money. We couldn't afford to go by train. This is before the days of where you could just fly everywhere. And it took us 3 days to hitchhike there. And when we got there, there was this whole mountain range, the European Alps, of wonderful, huge faces to climb. And because we had our equipment, we thought, well, let's just give it a go. And we went on to one climb, and then we went on to the next. And each climb, just like with rock climbing, was harder than the one before. And we were just propelled up these climbs. And sometimes they were very dangerous. Sometimes they were very difficult. On this picture here, I'm standing on a piece of ice 1 centimeter thick that is stuck to a slab of rock. And you can see the ice axe that you're passing around now. You can see it in my right hand. I call that ice axe my lucky axe, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And the ice axe in my left hand is my unlucky axe. I did lots of climbs with my lucky axe and my unlucky axe. Lots of climbs. Eventually, we felt ready to tackle the biggest route that we wanted to do on that climbing holiday. We were in the Alps for about a month, and we climbed 4 peaks. And then we thought, well, let's get on to this hardest route. And in order to get to these alpine routes, you've got to walk up to a hut first. So the European Alps are covered in huts. There's loads and loads of huts. They're like miniature hotels. And you walk up to them the day before, and then you can stay there the night. You can have a meal, and then you get woken up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and you go down into the dining room, and you have a light breakfast, and then you go into a wet room at the bottom of just by the entrance. And there you gear up, you put your ice axes on, you get your ice axes, you put your boots on, your crampons, your climbing harnesses. And everybody trudges out the door, all this equipment jangling towards their climbs. Well, Chris and I, we walked up there the night before, but we couldn't afford to stay in the hut. We didn't have enough money. But again, we weren't going to let that hold us back. We had our dream of climbing this mountain. So we sat in our puffer jackets outside, and we shivered through the night. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, we couldn't stand it anymore. So we went inside the changing room, and because there was nobody up yet, and we geared up with our stuff, and we hiked off to the mountain. And this was the face that we were climbing. It's called the North Face of the Treacherous. Now, you would have never have heard of that. It's in the European Alps, but mountaineers have all heard of the North Face of the Treacherous. It's 800 meters high. Now, 800 meters might not mean much to you, but down there in the bottom left is a scale picture of the tallest building in Adelaide. That building is 140 meters high. So that will give you some idea of the scale of the climb that we were doing. And we were climbing this big face. And one of us would go up first and lead the rope out. And the ropes were about 45 meters long. Lead out the rope, and then use your hammer, on the hammerhead on one of your ice axes to hit in an ice piton, and that would hold you to the ice. And then you would belay your partner up, and then that person would go on up then what they call the next pitch. So you leapfrog each other up. One person will lead, the other person will come up, and then that person will go straight through and lead the next pitch, and so on. So we leapfrogged up this north face of the tree alley. And getting up to about this point here, can you see that red line? So we got up to that point there, and it was, by which time it was light, and we were about 600 meters up. That's about 2,000 feet, 600 meters up the side of this mountain. And Chris was hanging on to 2 ice screws when I climbed up to him. He got 2 of these ice pitons in, and the ice was so hard he couldn't get them all the way in. Couldn't get them all the way in. So he had to just hang off tie them off really, really low. And the next pitch, which was my lead, was the hardest pitch on the climb. And as I set off, I looked back at him, and Chris is hanging off these 2 ice screws. And I've got the hardest and the most difficult ice pitch of my life up ahead of me. And he just said to me, he said, "Steve, don't fall off." And I knew what he meant. We both knew that if I fell off, those 2 ice screws probably wouldn't hold us, and that I would pull Chris off, and we would both fall 600 meters to our deaths. So I was scared as I set off climbing. We were climbing like this, just on the front points of our crampons, an axe in each hand, and climbing the ice got gradually steeper and steeper. This isn't a picture of it, because we don't have any pictures of the actual climb, because we were too terrified to get our cameras out. But it was a lot like this. And it got steeper and steeper until eventually Chris yelled out, and I was climbing this really, really hard piece of ice. And I was getting really tired, and my arms were pumping out, and my feet on those crampons were starting to shake. It was like a sewing machine. And I had one more move to make before the angle eased off. And Chris yelled out, 5 feet. 5 feet. I had 5 feet of rope left. So I'd run out a full rope length. That's about, 5 feet is what, just less than 2 meters. And I had run out nearly 45 meters of rope. So I'm a long way above Chris, a long way above him. And I've got this one move to make, and I'm so tired that I'm afraid that I might not be able to make it. I'm afraid that I won't have the strength to hit the axes into the ice. And there ahead of me, I can see a crack. And I know that you shouldn't really use cracks in ice, because you don't know how strong the ice is around the crack. The best thing to do is to hit the axe in and get a really good purchase. So I got a really good purchase with my lucky axe, and I'm hanging off that axe. And then I reached up and I thought, I haven't got the strength to hit my unlucky axe into the ice. So I just hooked it on this crack. And then I pulled out the axe that you're now passing around. And I went like this, and the whole of the ice that I was hanging from broke away. I went over backwards, and I fell free for, well, it seemed quite a long way because the ice was so steep. And I hit the ice on my forearms, head first, and then I start plummeting down this ice slope. And the ice is rushing past me, and and my sleeves were forced by the ice right up into my armpits, so I've got bare skin running down the rough ice. And I'm falling, and I knew, without any shadow of a doubt, that I was dead. I couldn't see any way out of that. Chris had said, don't fall off. I'd fallen off at the worst possible point. I'd fallen off at the point that I was highest above Chris. So I'm plummeting down that ice slope, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm dead at 18. And the other thing I thought was, sorry, Chris, I've killed us both. It's funny, isn't it? You're there and you know that you're going to die, but from somewhere, I still found room to apologize. And the other wonderful thing about it, and I say it's a wonderful thing, was that as I was falling and I knew that I was going to die, I felt no fear. All I felt was acceptance. It was extraordinary. It was what you might call a state of grace. I'm falling and I'm falling and I'm going to die, but it's okay. And then I feel the rope come against my harness. So I've fallen a long way. I've fallen maybe 80 meters. And then the rope, I can feel it start to tug on my harness. And climbing ropes stretch. They're not like steel cables. They're a bit like bungee cords. They stretch a long way before they will snap, almost twice their length. And that's because if you fell straight onto a steel cable, you'd break your back. All right? The shock would be too sudden. So the climbing rope stretch. So I felt the stretch of the rope gradually pulling me in. But as soon as I felt that stretch, I felt hope. And as soon as I felt hope, I felt fear. Because as long as we have hope, then there is doubt that we're going to live. There is some doubt that we're going to live, but there's also hope that we will live. So when there was no hope, I felt no fear. When there was hope, I did. It came rushing back in. So that was the most terrifying part of the climb for me. And eventually I stopped, and I just swung in, and I couldn't believe that I'd survived the fall. And I remember the blood on the ice as I'm hanging on the rope from my arms, all the skin taken off them. And I remember thinking to myself, the first thought that came to my head was, thank you, Jesus. I felt gratitude. I really felt gratitude. And I have felt gratitude for every day that I have lived since then. And that's a lot of days. That's 44 years worth of days. So this is a long time ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. So I had a sprained knee, and I was a bit knocked up. But we decided we had to finish the climb. It was quicker to go up the climb than it was to go down. So we found an easier route. We didn't go straight up, and we took this route here, where the arrow's pointing up to the right, which was a lot less steep. And we had a long, painful day coming down the other side of the mountain. So that was probably the closest I've ever come to dying. I've had other escapades since then that come pretty close. After doing that, after having that survival and that big accident, I knew that I had to keep climbing mountains. If I didn't climb a mountain straight away, or as soon as I was able to, I'd probably never climb again because I'd be too terrified. So I waited in the Alps. Chris hitchhiked home. He'd had enough. He didn't want to climb with me anymore after that. And I stayed because I wanted to do another climb. So I did another climb, and as a result, I just kept climbing. I went back to the Alps many times. I went to Alaska and did a first ascent of a new climb. I attempted a very hard route in the Himalayas. But each time I was trying to do something harder than what I'd done before. Because that was my purpose. That's what I wanted to do. And I knew that if I just kept pushing, eventually my luck would run out. So I thought, I need to do something else. So when you have a purpose, you can, it's nothing wrong with changing it. If your passion for doing something changes or tails off, then replace it with something else. So what was I going to replace mountaineering with? I was 23 years old. What was I going to replace it with? It had been my life since I'd left school. What could be as challenging? What could be as rewarding? And I listed all the things, and I thought, maybe I'll be able to get into the British Commandos. Very, very hard to get into. But because of my mountaineering, I applied, and I got in. So being in the military was one of the best things I ever did. I highly recommend it to anybody. It's a wonderful discipline. You'll do things that you would never have ever dreamt that you would have done. And for me, going to Zimbabwe, I was posted to Africa, and I'm working with Africans, and I'm training Africans. Bit of a weird thing to be doing for a mountaineer. I never dreamed that I'd ever be doing that. But while I was there, I never forgot about mountaineering, because mountaineering was in my blood. I wanted to keep doing it in a way, but I just knew that if I kept doing it, I was going to get killed. But there was a guy that I worked with in Zimbabwe, and he was in the army, and he was a member of the Army Mountaineering Club. And he told me that there was going to be a military expedition to Everest. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I joined the Army Mountaineering Club, and I applied. And guess what? I got a place. Because of all that climbing I'd done, and I'd already been to the Himalayas, I was one of the most experienced members of the expedition. So I went to Everest, but we attempted one of the hardest routes. We were attempting the right-hand skyline of this photograph here. It's called the West Ridge. It's only been climbed 6 times. Even now, it's only ever been climbed 6 times. So we were out of our depth. We didn't climb it. And 4 years later, I went back on another military expedition, and we didn't climb it again. Because it wasn't about getting to the top, it was about how we got to the top. We wanted to do it not by the standard route, we wanted to do it by a difficult route, because that's what felt good. It was all about doing things that were hard. But while I was doing those expeditions, I thought, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? You know, I could do these climbs, and I'm in the military. How can I combine those two things? Well, in the military, you learn how to lead. I was an officer in the British Royal Marines, and it's all about leadership. How could I combine mountaineering with leadership? And of course, the answer is obvious. I became a mountain guide. And eventually, having taken people up lots of mountains all over the world, I felt that I was ready to lead an expedition up Everest. Now, this is in the early 90s. It had never been done before, a guided ascent of Everest. But I had this idea: if you can take a person up a mountain in Scotland or the Alps or an easy low peak in the Himalaya, why not Everest? It's the same principle. So I launched this expedition, and I got 11 people from all over the world to pay me to take them to the top of Everest. And by the time we got the team going, other people had already started doing it. But the team that I led was the first British attempt, or first British commercial expedition to Everest. So it was all unknown. And I'd never been to the top of Everest myself. And there I've got these people paying me a lot of money to take them to the top. And I'd not even been there. So I was taking a big risk. But these people were prepared to take that risk. They just wanted to climb Everest. So after going up and down the mountain, low down, to get acclimatized and carrying camps in and fixing ropes, we were ready to go for the summit. And by this time, we'd been on the mountain for 6 weeks. So here's 4 of us ready to go for the top. And this is just taken, this photograph was taken at base camp. So we're still 4 or 5 days away from the summit. That's me on the left. Next to me is Ramon. He was 60 years old. The oldest person that had ever stood on the summit of Everest was 55 years old. And there's Ramon, and he's 60, and he wants to get there. So we set off up the mountain, and we cover the same ground up to Camp 3, because we'd all been up to Camp 3 before. And eventually, we get up beyond that, and we're moving up towards the top camp, which is a big plateau called the South Col. And as we were approaching that plateau, I went ahead of the others, and the wind was blowing, and it was really cold and nasty. And we weren't using oxygen at this stage. I wanted everyone to go to 8,000 meters, up to as far up the mountain as they could, without using oxygen. So I saw this big block, this rock, and I headed for that, because I thought, if we can get behind that rock, we can have a rest there and have something to drink before we move that last few meters up towards to where we were going to put our camp. So I sat down there behind this rock, and when I sat down, I realized that there was a friend of mine next to me. I didn't see him when I sat down. That friend of mine had been there for a year. I remember looking at him and seeing his face that is just wizened and leathered from the weather, and he's frozen solid. and his black beard, because he was an Indian climber, and his black beard is just fluttering in the breeze. And I remember thinking, there's no difference between you and me. We were both the same. I could very, very easily be just like him. But the only difference was, apart from him being dead and me being alive, was that he hadn't been on Everest before. He'd never been so high. He hadn't done his preparation, and he pushed too hard. So we'd shared the same passion, we shared the same purpose, but he hadn't done the preparation. So if you have a purpose, then don't overreach. Be careful not to overreach, because dreams can be dangerous, as it was for him. And it was a warning to me that we were in very dangerous territory. The air at 8,000 meters is 1/3 of the pressure that it is at sea level. All right, you can die just from being there. If any one of us, me included, went to 8,000 meters where this guy was lying, we would be dead within an hour because we haven't acclimatized. So it's a dangerous place, and yet we were climbing a mountain. So we went on and we set our camp up, and we don't really sleep at these camps. You just lie down, and we did have some oxygen. This is where we first started using oxygen. And we're inside the tent, and you just basically wait, and you wait, and you wait until it's time to go for the summit. And we set off at 1 o'clock in the morning. And we set off at 1 o'clock in the morning because we want as much time as possible. We need as much daylight as possible for getting back down. And there's a turn back time. We had to reach the summit by midday so that we had enough daylight to get back down to this camp again. So the more time we had before that midday, then the more chance that we would have of climbing the mountain safely. So we set off at 1 a.m. And the idea was to get up to that ridge in the background, about halfway up that ridge, by the time the sun came up. So we climbed with our head torches in the dark, plodding up that great big snow slope. And eventually, we sensed the sun coming up and the dawn, and everyone was going well. I thought, this is fantastic. Everyone's going well. And sure enough, we reached that point that I was hoping to reach exactly as the sun came up and touched the highest mountains in the Himalayas. And it was a wonderful moment because when we were there, we got the rest of the day ahead of us, and everyone was going well, and the weather was perfect. And I dared for the first time think that we would get to the top. So we climb on up to the southeast ridge, and we reach this point called the South Summit. And here's Jeanette Harrison coming up to the South Summit. She was the only female member of the expedition. And she's coming up in her shirt sleeves because the weather was so good. So where is the South Summit? Well, there's a distant picture of Everest, and there is the South Summit. The next picture is taken looking from there up towards the summit. And there's Jeanette and a guy that she'd met on the expedition and fallen in love with. And they are going up to the summit together. So that's pretty good for a first date, isn't it? The summit of Everest. Well, they got there, and they had about 10 minutes all on their own on the summit of Everest. How wonderful is that? And here is Ramon, the 60-year-old. He's climbing the last steep section up to the top of Everest. And eventually, you go up above the South Summit, and you go up this snow slope, and we're climbing on oxygen, and you feel like you're spacewalking because it's so high. And then suddenly, there is no more up, and everything just drops away, and this is the view that awaits you. You're looking into Tibet. And that's a wonderful thing when you get to this point, the highest point on earth. What better sense of achievement, what better symbol of achievement could there be than getting to this highest point, which is why so many people want to climb it, why people pay a lot of money to climb it. So here's a few photographs from the summit. There's some of my other team members on the top. And there's Jeanette, the first woman to climb Everest, or one of the first British women to ever climb Everest. She and her boyfriend, Gary, that she'd met on the expedition, went on to climb several more peaks. together. And then a few years later, Jeanette was buried in an avalanche. And Gary dug for her for 2 days, but failed to find her. So we never know how long we've got. We never know what's going to happen. And there's Ramon, 60 years old, on the summit of Everest, the oldest person that ever got there. Until 5 years later, a guy came along who was 1 day older. So the age record then became something that people chased. It became a big thing to do. And so there was this leapfrogging of age records over the next 20 or 30 years. And the age record now stands at, wait for it, 80. 80 years old. I met an 85-year-old 4 years ago. I was at Everest Base Camp, and I met an 85-year-old who was trying to get the age record. He climbed it when he was 76. He climbed it when he was 76. And then this Japanese guy came along who was 80 and climbed it. And then he wanted to go back when he was 85 and take the record back. So he got to base camp where he promptly died. The altitude killed him at base camp. He just pushed too hard. So I was 17 years old when I climbed my first ice. 17 years later, I stood on the summit of the world's highest mountain. That all happened because I had purpose. And that purpose I first realized I got while I was at school, just like you. So you're all here now at school, and you're all on the brink of something. You all, if you find your purpose, that will give you meaning for life. And purpose is the true path to happiness. And do you want to be happy? Yes? Does anyone not want to be happy? You need to go and talk to somebody. So don't worry about people making fun of you. So remember that. Does that pose of me on the summit, does that look familiar? That photograph is on the alumni page of my old school. I wonder how many of the people that mocked me when I was 17, 18 years old are still laughing. They're still watching TV, I expect. So don't let what people say hold you back. Explore everything that interests you for your passion, because the passion will give you purpose, and your purpose will lead to happiness. And don't delay, because you don't know when your time will be up. My time is up now. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.